Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini here with the indomitable Charles Coulombe.
Here again.
Indomitable, that's what Beverly Stevens just called you, the owner of Regina Magazine.
Gosh, oh, she's right. Hope I am indomitable.
Yeah. Shout out to her. She's one of the hardest working, smartest people in the business. And she's going to be growing Regina Magazine into a Catholic media empire. It's already on the way.
It is, and in fact, I have agreed to work with her on putting together an October 2018, tour of the California wine country, a few missions, the Bay Area, the Monterey Peninsula. In other words, the nice part of California, not where we are. Okay? You know, we've got all the perversion, none of the beauty. But they have it up there. We're going to Northern California, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
Even better if I don't actually make it myself and just help out in designing it. But anyway.
All right, let's start this show off with a great question, shall we?
All right. I'm open for great questions.
Jacobite Joe asks...
I like the name anyway.
Great name. Why is the Old Testament so Calvinistic? I'm reading the Old Testament now, and God promises the Israelites material wealth, success, good crops, and the land of milk and honey if they listen to him. And God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. As if the Pharaoh didn't have a choice and was predestined by God to not let the Israelites go. Why is the Old Testament like this? And does this mean that the Calvinists are right?
Well, firstly, you got to understand the Old Testament isn't Calvinist. The Calvinists were Old Testament. Well, no, we have something called history. And some things like George Washington didn't read Norman Mailer, because Norman Mailer was later. See that?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So it's not all together in one thing like the end of the Russian ark.
Oh, okay.
It's everyone lives in different periods. I wasn't around in my great grandfather's time, and I probably won't be around in 2 centuries. That's the way that works. Anyway, the thing about the Old Testament that you've got to bear in mind is that it was tailor-made for the Jews. All right, what does this mean? Well, as we've addressed on earlier shows, the Jews alone preserved in its purity and its fullness the original revelation given to all mankind. And then they had an added covenant, the covenant with Abraham. But what was the earmark of that culture? It was a certain amount of hard-heartedness, a certain amount of materialism. Our Lord came not to abolish the law, i.e. the Old Testament, but to fulfill it. So the Old Testament is not abolished, but it's brought to where it ought to be. Time and again our Lord talks about fulfilling the law, about how your fathers were hard-hearted and that kind of thing. It is all true. And bear in mind also that when our Lord came, the Old Testament, on the one hand, the priesthood was run by the Sadducees, who didn't really believe in much, and the actual observance of the law and the prophets was left to the Pharisees, who tended to add their own stuff and make it even harder. Kind of the same things you see in the church today, but never mind. That being the case, it's important to understand that what Calvinism did, really, was to keep only the Old Testament and essentially to reject the New. Why do I say this? Well, because think for a minute about what the church of the New Testament was. It was the church of mercy as well as justice. The Old Testament is mostly about justice, though you have tinges of mercy. It was the church of the new law, the church of a unbloody sacrifice offered by a non-hereditary priesthood, unlike the Old Testament, which was a church of an hereditary priesthood offering a bloody sacrifice. Moreover, it was a sacrifice that could not actually restore the balance between man and God. Only the unbloody sacrifice that represents, as they say, the bloody sacrifice of Christ on the cross. Only that renewed unbloody sacrifice can make things straight between God and man, and in a way that wasn't possible in the Old Testament. But the Calvinists turned their back on all that. They got rid of the priesthood, they got rid of the sacraments, they got rid of the unbloody sacrifice. So what were they left with? In a manner of speaking, they became very much like what the Jews ended up having to become after the destruction of the temple. What do I mean by that? Well, remember that Old Testament Judaism was centered around the sacrifice at the temple. Again, hereditary priesthood, bloody sacrifice of animals and birds. All right. What happens? The temple's destroyed. With it, the genealogies. So although we have people named Cohen and Levi, it's not 100% sure they're descendants of the priests and the Levites. And in any case, the temple, where the sacrifices and most of the ritual heart of Judaism was performed, is destroyed. So what happens? Judaism basically has to be reorganized as a religion of scripture study, moral observances, and family celebrations. And that's what Judaism had to become if it was going to continue as an entity. Calvinist Christianity is very like that. Because having rejected the priesthood and the sacrifice, what did it become? You guessed it. A religion of scripture study, moral observance, and family celebration. So that reinforced, as you might say, the resemblances between Calvinism and the Old Testament. So does it mean the Calvinists are right? No. It emphasizes just how wrong they were.
I'm sorry, I might have missed it in the beginning. So what did God mean when he said, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart"?
Well,
he didn't mean it. He didn't mean he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart.
Well, in the sense, let's put it this way. He meant that he was going to allow Pharaoh to follow the desires of his own heart. So you remember that, and here we get into the question of grace versus free will, which is always a good way to go insane. But Pharaoh did not mean well by the children of Israel. And I think it's fair to say that in this instance, God allowed him to follow his worst possible instincts rather than inspiring him with something better.
Oh, okay.
But again, you start to get into the relationship between grace and free will, and that's something that we very wisely stay away from, because you will never solve it at the side of the grave.
Okay. Will Johnston wrote in saying, "I was wondering why Thomism has become so dominant in traditionalist circles, and why it seems almost anathema to some traditionalists to say you are not a Thomist, or that you are an ultra-realist or Platonist."
Well, there are some very important reasons for that. The first is that Neo-Thomism was the established philosophical school at the time of the council, but it was already coming under attack by people who, for other motives, cited the authority of the Church Fathers and the other doctors. When I say for other motives, it wasn't because they were necessarily keen on returning to the Fathers or dealing with the other doctors, but simply because they wanted to oppose orthodoxy. And Neo-Thomism was seen as the orthodoxy of the time. So a lot of it is bound up with personal memory.
Okay.
But there are other reasons. I mean, Platonism and Aristotelianism are the two great currents in Greek philosophy, and thus in Western philosophy. Aristotle tended to place the material over the spiritual, and Plato the reverse. It's important to point out that both of these tendencies, when taken to their extremes, are wrong. Platonism and non-Christian Neoplatonism certainly can end up almost in a sort of dualism where the physical is evil and the spiritual is good. That's really a screwy thing.
Isn't that Gnosticism? What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, well, it's some kinds of Gnosticism.
Yeah.
But it's certainly Manichaeanism, it's Catharism, all that stuff, Albigensianism. But contrariwise, the Aristotelian element, the materialist thing, could go the other direction and put us right where we are now. Where you've got a sort of opposite dualism, where only the material is good and the spiritual is evil.
Ain't that the truth?
So, the thing you got to bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, is that all philosophy is an attempt to understand and explain what is basically incomprehensible and unexplainable. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, don't get me wrong. But you had, in the Middle Ages, a number of schools that contended with one another and acted as a corrective, as you might say, on each other's excesses. Now, St. Thomas, as we know, at least in the Summa, and it's important I say that because people equate the views of St. Thomas Aquinas with the Summa, and that's not always correct. But he denied the Immaculate Conception in the Summa, and he did so for reasons that were strictly Aristotelian. There are a couple of other problems in the Summa, but that's the one that really jumps out at you. Contrariwise, the Immaculate Conception was championed by the Scotist school, Duns Scotus Franciscans, who were, more or less Platonic, Christian Neoplatonists. I think probably the best statement, the best comment about the difference between St. Thomas and, say, St. Bonaventure, who was a good spokesman for the other side, was that St. Thomas put God at the summit of all things, whereas St. Bonaventure looked at all things in their relationship to God. Now, both of these are true, but they're a very different way of looking at the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what has to be understood. The historical reasons for disliking ultra-realists and Neoplatonists and all that are very clear. They're erroneous, but they're very clear. It would be just as erroneous to want to get rid of St. Thomas and the moderate realists entirely. You've got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that philosophy, within the bounds of defined orthodoxy, of dogmatic definition, within those bounds, there's a huge play for philosophy, precisely because of the differing points of view. One set of philosophers will tell you, well, we can only understand God in terms of how he's not like us, how he's different from us. Another set will tell you, we can only understand God in terms of how he is like us. We're made in his image. Well, actually, which one is right? Well, they both are. They're both correct. But they're looking at it from different points of view. You get insights from both of them. But if you think that either one is the end-all and be-all, that either one is exhausted, the inexhaustible, you're wrong. That's why St. Thomas refused to finish the Summa and said it was just a thing of straw compared to all the realities. Well, indeed it is. And we will spend our whole lives, ladies and gentlemen, attempting to get a grasp on those realities and never quite being able to. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. But one of there are several problems that I've always had with some of the Neo-Thomists. One of them is the absolute separation between philosophy and theology. And this has bothered me simply because philosophy being a search for objective truth, theology being the examination of the highest truth, how could you separate those things completely? How could you adequately describe the human being without reference to the soul? How could you adequately describe creation as though the creator didn't exist?
That's almost like Immanuel Kant, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's also very modern. And a lot of people would say, well, the Neo-Thomists didn't do that. Okay, well, here again, the philosophers can go on and on and on, fighting forever, and they should, within the bonds of dogmatic definition. Show me a philosophy that does not allow for the Immaculate Conception, and I'll show you a philosophy that's certainly wrong on that point. And contrariwise, You know, when people bring up, for instance, the law of contradiction, something cannot be one and many at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about the Blessed Sacrament? Oh, that's different. That's a miracle. Well, it would be better to say that most of the time something can't be one and many, rather than to say it simply can't be. Because if you do that, if you leave the miraculous out of your theorizing, then you're leaving reality out of your theorizing. So you've got to find a way somehow to let it in. And what I'm saying, by the way, is certainly subject to question and censure by an awful lot of people, but I'm being asked the question, I'm giving it my answer. I'd also say, too, that the history of philosophy has shown, and it doesn't necessarily mean it had to work out this way, it just did, that, of course, from the moderate realists, as the Thomists and neo-Thomists were called, and just to be clear, when we're speaking about realism in this sense, we're not talking about reality. We're talking about the reality of the Platonic forms. This is pretty outre, isn't it? But basically, Plato taught that everything you see on earth are shadows of realities that are in another realm someplace. Things like chair and man and duck, and for that matter, love and honor, are universals that are in this world beyond, and they cast their reflection down upon us. Now, the Christian Neoplatonists said, well, there's not some other realm, it's in the mind of God. And from that mind of God, these things come down. And they are absolutely real, they exist in the mind of God. The moderate realists said, no. They're real, all right, but they take their reality from the sum total of their concrete expressions, i.e., to make this a little simpler, where the Christian Neoplatonists would say, ultra-realists would say, men take their manhood from the model man in God's mind. The moderate realists would say, no, it's the totality of men from whom that notion of man acquires its reality. If you see the difference. Well, that went a bit further under the folk who were called conceptualists, who said, oh, no, these universals are simply human concepts without any objective reality at all. They have a certain reality, but the reality is conceptual. And then beyond them, there was one more step, the nominalists, who said, no, they're not real at all, they're just names people give things. And interestingly enough, Martin Luther was a nominalist. And nominalism was the leading philosophy in his area at his time. Part of the reason why Thomism has gotten such prestige is because, in response to Luther's hatred of it, it was made the philosophy du jour at the Council of Trent. They had a copy of the Summa on the altar next to the Bible.
Wow.
But that's also why the Council of Trent did not define the Immaculate Conception. So, my little joke is that whenever you have a copy of the Summa with the imprimatur that includes the denial of the Immaculate Conception, you've got an imprimatur that's invalid. Ah!
Wow.
So, it's a complex thing, and emotions come into it, ladies and gentlemen. You will rarely see people get so emotional within the church as on this very complex question. If you don't endorse any variety of thing that calls itself Thomist, you must be a heretic. That's basically what you get. What this would do for such paladins of the faith who were definitely not Thomists, as Dr. William Mara and Dietrich von Hildebrand, I don't know.
One little tidbit, I believe my brother Steve, the owner of Tumblr House, has called moderate realism inadequate realism.
Inadequate, yes, that's right. That was inadequate. Well, see, the reason is that ultra-realism is also called exaggerated realism in the history of philosophy books. So that was his response. If you're gonna call the ultra realists exaggerated realists, well then okay, fine. The moderate realists are inadequate realists. You want to be insulting, we can be insulting. It won't accomplish much, but we can do it. The other thing too to bear in mind is that because so many of the protagonists of a quote-unquote post-Vatican II reform were anti-Thomist. That's another thing that gave Thomism an added bit of prestige.
Yeah.
Because it was a target for such terrible people. And again, let me be very clear, ladies and gentlemen. I am by no means in favor of the abolition of Thomism or the burning of the Summa or anything like that. It's interesting, again, bringing up St. Bonaventure and St. Thomas, that not only were they good friends, but when both were asked to compose an office for Corpus Christi, St. Bonaventure read St. Thomas's and burnt his own.
Wow.
So, do let's get a grip.
I thought St. Bonaventure said something bad about Thomas
He
Aquinas.
did. He said he was the father of all heresies.
That's pretty bad.
It is bad. And he said it about a friend. It is. But he was referring again to the materializing tendency that he saw. I mean, you have one of the things that Thomas, on the one hand, expressly condemned, but on the other, has been found by some of his followers, has been taken off with by some of his followers, is the idea of the double truth. The notion that something can be true in philosophy but false in theology, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And I first got an education in the double truth in high school.
For evolution.
For evolution, when the brother, the religious brother who was teaching us was going on about evolution. I said, okay, brother, at what point did the soul enter the ape, and when did the ape fall? He said, oh, you're mixing apples and oranges. The one is the religious truth, the other is the scientific truth. And I said, you mean they're both lies, which he didn't appreciate for some reason. But that double truth comes back to us when a lot of Thomists find themselves dealing with the miraculous, which we touched on earlier. If you bring up a question like, how does transubstantiation square with the principle of contradiction, non-contradiction? Oh, well, that's a miracle. That doesn't signify. Well, hold on. You've just given me the double truth. So, again, I don't want to use this as a board to smack Thomists with. That's really not my intention. But they do tend to smack non-Thomists. Whereas the truth is, you really do need both. I hate to come out for diversity, but I think it's actually very important in philosophical matters that so long as the dogmatic definitions be maintained, that there be a certain amount of diversity. Not unlike the differences between East and West in the church.
Exactly. So we got a couple questions on flags from our monarchist friends.
Oh boy.
Probably were thinking about this during the 4th of July.
That'll do it.
John Hicks asks, would the Grand Union flag or the red ensign with the King's colors in the canton be the more appropriate banner to be flown by contemporary loyalists in these United States? I'd love to display both flags and the Union flag of 1801, but I can only fly a single flag.
Okay, well, just so you know, ladies and gentlemen, when he says the Union flag prior to 1801, it means without the red X, which represented the cross of St. Patrick, and the Union of Ireland with the United Kingdom, which only happened in 1801.
Wow.
When George III was king of the 13 colonies, he was king of England and Scotland, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, but separately king of Ireland. It was only in 1801, with Catholic support at the time, let me tell you, that Ireland joined the United Kingdom legally, although they were subject to Britain. Anyway, well, how to answer that question? In my wonderful book, Star Spangled Crown, you may remember that the new king kept the American flag as it was, simply because it has become such a big piece of Americana that people are willing to die for it. Old glory and all that. And that is not something that is ever likely to change. At least I hope not, personally. That having been said, though, the question becomes, what about a specifically a flag that specifically identifies one as a monarchist and an American monarchist? Well, for that, I would say probably the Grand Union flag.
May I ask what flag you fly?
Yeah, I don't. I don't have a pole.
Oh.
If I did, it would be either the current American flag or the Grand Union.
Okay.
Or if I really wanted to annoy people, the Confederate battle flag, but that would strictly be to upset people. Especially in California, ladies and gentlemen. You want to get your house egged? Put up the battle flag and see what happens. Because we live in a free country where freedom is everything, and self-expression and the ability to say what you believe is really a dogma of the state. Because we're all free and stuff. At any rate,
just as long as you don't express hate.
then you'll be beaten to a pulp. Yeah, I know. It's beautiful. But seriously, ladies and gentlemen, if you want a flag to express American monarchist identity, probably the Grand Union is the way to go. Yeah.
Okay. Second question on flags. JB says, now that our constitutional republic seems to be on its last legs, I'd like to take down my American flag and replace it with something a little more forward-thinking. What kind of symbol should I display? Is there a coat of arms or standard so that when the king returns, he will see that I recognize his legitimacy and consider myself his subject? I'm not 100% sure that this is a serious question.
Well, yeah, I'd say you want it when Aragorn comes back. You want to have flying outside your house the flag bearing 7 stars and 7 stones and 1 white tree to show your obedience to Gondor and Arnor. No, well, you know, if that wasn't a serious question, smart guy, if it was a serious question, we got a long way to go before you're even worried about that. If you don't want to put up the American flag, fine, put up the Grand Union. But don't get bent out of shape about it, no matter what you do. And if it wasn't a serious question, I'll see you in Minas Tirith.
Okay.
Okay, what else we got?
Sorry. A question for you from a gentleman who goes by the alias of Fascist Tsar 1918 Romanov.
Wow. Wow, I don't know what to say about that. I've never heard of a fascist czar. And 1918 was a bad year to be a Romanov.
Yeah, it was.
Gosh, I don't know what to say to that. But that wasn't the question.
No, he has a great question.
All right.
What were the noble and bad traits of the Chinese monarchy, and how did the Chinese emperors deal with Christianity?
Woof, that is a good question. Well, the bad traits is that the biggest bad trait is that it was non-Christian, non-Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And so the laws had a tremendous severity to them.
Like what?
Well, like you could be put to death in very unpleasant ways that the Inquisition never came up with. Death by 1,000 cuts.
Really?
And being skinned alive, and just really unpleasant stuff.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, wasn't nice. Having said that, it was still better than Mao.
What? Why is that?
Oh, because Mao Zedong was a great one for killing thousands upon thousands at once. He had a bigger body count than Stalin, let alone Hitler.
I see.
And yet we don't have the same, we're not raised with the same disgust for Mao that we are for Hitler. And with good reason, because we're making money out of his successors. And you know, with Americans, money covers a lot of moral issues. That's how we are as a people. And I'm proud of it, personally. Anyway, it could be true. Anyway, but there were some redeeming characteristics. Confucianism certainly, at least externally speaking, it certainly led one to cultivate the natural virtues. And the other thing that's interesting, certain, I must say, Protestant Chinese have gone into great detail likening the sacrificial ceremonies of the emperors to Old Testament ritual. And to the degree that there's any merit in this, I suspect it would be because of that, of what we spoke about earlier, of the remnants of the original revelation given all mankind surviving in that particular manner among the Chinese. Artistically, of course, the Chinese emperors encouraged all kinds of beauty. There's no doubt about that. Breathtaking, some of it. As to how they were with Christianity, it depended upon the emperor. Some of them favored, especially under the Ming and the early Qing dynasties, they favored the faith to some degree. Certainly, it became the practice for some of them to have Jesuit astronomers. So some of them favored us. With the Chinese rites becoming illegal, there began something of a persecution.
I didn't catch that. I didn't follow. Chinese rites becoming illegal?
Yeah, the Jesuits of the 1500s came up with what we call the Chinese rites, which meant that Catholics would be allowed to indulge in a certain amount of ancestor veneration, a certain amount of veneration of Confucius and so on, which was held to be civic and not religious. But the Dominicans said, no, it's religious. And this led to the whole fight over them, the Chinese rites controversy. Eventually, the Vatican, in the late 17th century, found in favor of the Dominicans, and the Chinese rites were banned. And the emperor at that time...
Wait, the Dominicans or the Jesuits?
The Jesuits favored them, the Dominicans opposed them.
Okay.
And so the Chinese emperor took offense to that. And that began the first round of persecutions. In the 19th century, the faith became involved, it became very much identified for many Chinese, not necessarily the emperors, but local governors and so on, with the depredations of the European powers. And so, whenever they were having a hard time with the Europeans, Chinese Catholics suffered. But contrariwise, when they were doing well with them, they were favored. And the last treaty between the Holy See and the Emperor of China, which was in 1909, 1910, gave the church a lot of benefits. The Catholic priests would have the same recognition as mandarins, that kind of thing. You can read all about it in the Catholic Encyclopedia entry on China, the old Catholic Encyclopedia. It goes into great detail. Unfortunately, for all concerned, the Chinese Revolution of 1911-1912 overthrew the monarchy and thus voided that treaty. And then the church faced a whole new set of issues. So that's what I have to say about the Chinese monarchy.
Okay. An anonymous person sent in 2 questions. I am a Haitian American and presently found out that Haiti had a Catholic king and an empire, but I am having trouble finding any more information in English. Do you know why they chose to later become a republic? How much influence does Catholicism have in the government there?
Good question. Well, firstly, the leader of Haitian independence, Toussaint Louverture, was both a good Catholic, a devout Catholic, and a strong royalist who favored Louis XVI. The Haitian Revolution was in reaction to the French Revolution because the administration in Haiti was taken over by the Republic.
When was the Haitian Revolution?
1792. But it soon went from being anti-Republican, after Toussaint was eliminated and lost control, to being anti-white. And that was why the vast majority of white Haitians were killed or fled the country. There's still a few left, though. Interestingly enough, the leading brand of rum in the country has been owned and run by the same family since before the Revolution.
What, Bacardi?
What's that?
Is that Bacardi?
No, that's Cuban.
Oh.
Frankly, I'm having a brain surge. I can't remember the name of it. But the same family has owned it all those years. They were expressly left alone by the revolutionaries. They were killing whites right and left, We're not touching these guys. And this is where rum comes from. We ain't touching that. So they didn't. But at any rate, in the aftermath, Haiti went through a number of changes of government. And at different times they had 3 emperors. But these guys were self-proclaimed, like Bokassa, the emperor of Central Africa. And all of them really went bad. They wanted to emulate Napoleon, basically. And they came to bad ends, each of them. So that's why. Plus, you have the United States, which didn't like the idea of homegrown monarchies around the continent.
Of course. Okay, his second question. Why do you think Central American and South American countries are so bad? I have heard from some prominent Protestants that it has to do with how authoritarian Catholic culture is, and how it doesn't allow people to think for themselves. They say that is why Catholic countries are always choosing dictators and ending up in poverty.
Well, firstly, I would disagree with the idea that they're bad. They generally don't push abortion the way we do. They don't murder children. They haven't desecrated marriage the way we have. So whether they're bad in the way that we're good, that's a whole other issue. Secondly, in terms of Catholic cultures being authoritarian, it's very true. In terms of people not being able to think for themselves, absolutely false. The reason why they're authoritarian is that Catholic cultures breed individualism, individual expression, individual thought. Catholic peoples are difficult to rule. They are very uproarious. At least when Catholic government is overthrown, they become that way.
So you're saying because Catholics are so individualistic, it takes generally a strong
hand,
leader.
Especially after the usual pattern is that you have a Catholic government that's grown up over long centuries. Then it gets overthrown and the populace fracture along one or more lines. Imbued with the Catholic idea that there can only be one truth, these different elements will never compromise. And so you need a strong government to get them to do anything. In Protestant countries, and particularly our own, compromise is everything. But so is conformity. Look, for instance, when the French government brought in gay marriage, there was rioting and demonstrations all over France.
Really? Wow.
With us, it was, oh, well, I guess if our masters in the Supreme Court say we have to, then we got to, because we do as we're told. Yes. Catholic peoples tend to assert strong individual identity. Protestant peoples, and most particularly the most Protestant people, the United States of America, culturally speaking, are little bunnies who do what their daddies tell them. And they don't dissent, because that would be bad. If you don't believe me, ladies and gentlemen, ask yourself the next time you're in a restaurant why you're careful about what you say. Do you think the secret police are going to hear you? Really? No. You're afraid that another diner will reprimand you. If you even stop to think about what you're afraid of, which most of us don't. I can remember on one occasion I was in a restaurant and I made a comment about Hillary Clinton when she was the wife of the president. And this large woman in a blue suit came up to me. How dare you speak that way about our First Lady? You're just against her because she's a strong woman. I said, no, I'm against her because she's in favor of infanticide. And I think it's very rude that you were eavesdropping on our conversation. Where do you get off? I wasn't listening to your conversation, but if I ever see you again, I'll make sure to be very attentive, and I'll correct you. How about that? Well, she went back to her seat. But that's what we're afraid of, ladies and gentlemen. We are self-policing. frankly, when you consider the amount of evils that we tolerate that our Central American brethren won't, yeah, it's because of Protestantism. Sure.
I have an embarrassing confession. I used to avoid making the sign of the cross and saying grace at a restaurant because of this sort of thing.
Sure.
You know, it's like, oh, well,
You
people
don't
are
want
going
to
to see
sit?
this.
Oh, no, when do people get upset? You know, I remember my late father, it was a similar thing. We were out with some friends of ours who were Catholic, and Dad began to cross himself, leading us. And the one guy said, oh, no, don't do that, don't do that. And Dad says, what do you mean, don't do that? He says, well, a lot of the people here aren't Catholic, they might be offended. My father said, did it ever occur to you that I might be offended because they're not doing it?
Oh.
But I'm able to survive this. If it's that much of a problem for them, they can dine elsewhere. So, yeah, I agree with the ministers. With these, absolutely. We are conformist bunnies who will tolerate any kind of evil that is shoved down our throats by our masters because of Protestantism and the attitudes that it engenders. You're right. I agree. I'm all for you. You bet. You got it, Reverend. Absolutely. Our kind of system is only possible in a setup, in a Protestant culture where everyone will compromise and where conformity is everything.
Okay. Well. Okay. We got on an important tangent. Did you have anything more to say about the South American countries?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, also you should bear in mind that their instability has been, since the 1820s, to a great degree, the responsibility of the United States. Why do I say this? Well, because remember what I said about a fracturing thing? Well, for Latin America, that was independence. And from that time on, up until the 20th century, when other things entered the mix, most Latin American countries faced unending conflict between conservatives who were pro-Catholic, pro-European, etc., and liberals who were anti-clerical, pro-American, and so on. Inevitably, to the degree that we could, depending on which country it was and where they were, we would support the liberal side. And this led to an unending round of civil wars, both in Central America and in Mexico. But to a huge degree, we're responsible for that, as also the proliferation of Protestant sects down there, which added to the instability. Again, our fault. I bad.
I heard that Protestants are really converting down there now. Is that true?
They sure are. Well, I mean, people converting to Protestantism?
Yes.
Oh, they sure are.
Why do you
Why
think
is that?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you why. Three reasons. One, the liturgical collapse of the church in Latin America.
No.
The doctrinal collapse of the church in Latin America. The Protestants talk about Jesus, where so many of our clerics talk about social reform. And mind you, it's not across the board. It varies from place to place. And again, also the fact that the Protestant sects are heavily funded from the United States and can provide food and medicine and so on and so forth in a way that the church simply can't. So you put all that together, and it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
And part of it is the fault of the United States, but part of it is certainly the fault of the Catholic hierarchy in those countries. You stray from the true faith, and a fake one will take your place. Because they're better at being a false religion than we could ever be. No, it's true. It's true. Protestant ministers of the gospel will always be better at pushing a false gospel than Catholic priests can be. One of my jokes, is that I could never be a Lutheran, because I could never join a religion founded by a Catholic priest. I know what they're like. I wouldn't do it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. I mean, every heresy, with the exception of the Waldenses, was founded by a Catholic cleric. I wouldn't touch him. John Calvin was an ordained subdeacon. And that's what I always tell our friend Doc Viso, who was an ordained subdeacon.
Yeah.
That every John Calvin's birthday, I'll call him up and wish him happy feast day for his patron saint. He never appreciates it.
Weird.
I don't know why. No.
Yeah.
Strange guy. Anyway, what else we got?
All right. Let's get a little bit more hopeful.
Oh, wow.
Last question.
Oh boy.
Great question from Max Wild.
Okay, love the name.
Yeah. How effective would a more traditional-minded pope be in this day and age? Suppose we had the likes of Pope St. Gregory the Great in there. What could he do that might change the status quo of matters within the church?
Well, you know, we sort of were halfway or a quarter of the way there under Benedict. If Pope Benedict had not simply been right-minded, but also as pushy as the current pope. If you could imagine a pope with Benedict's orientation and Francis's drive. You don't like it? You're out of the job! Give me a call from Alaska or wherever you end up. Well, that would have been neat. I would have enjoyed watching it, frankly. That's why so many people watch The Young Pope. There's a certain amount of wish fulfillment in there. But, and here's the big but, that would also have caused a great many defections from the faith. I mean, imagine if you had a pope who was every bishop here in the United States pushed Humanae Vitae and said, you know why you guys are all upset over immigration and stuff? It's because you're not breeding. Well, we would lose a lot of lukewarm Catholics over that. A lot. And that would have consequences. It would also, some good, some bad. And I know, ladies and gentlemen, that our first impulse is, wow, that'd be great, I'd be in on that deal. Well, maybe you would be, maybe you wouldn't. Because the blowback from the civil authorities in certain countries, maybe not this one, maybe not under this administration, but certainly under the last one, and maybe under a future one, would have been tremendous. So, I think a pope of that sort would encounter a lot of problems. But there's a second thing, and that is, do we deserve a pope of that sort as Catholics? I mean, the majority of us. That's a whole other issue.
Do we?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, we lukewarm are the majority. You know, the pious are always, the devout are always a small minority, never more than now. A pope like that would be a martyr, a dry martyr, if not a wet one, a white martyr, if not a red martyr.
Right.
It's hard to say. I mean, I'd like to think that I would revel under such a pope, and I like to think that I'd be in the forefront of his defenders. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, you never know until you come to the point. I'd like to think that if I were faced with martyrdom, I would persevere. But I don't know that. And nobody does until you come to it. I think that I wouldn't mind a quick martyrdom like Padre Pro got. You're up, Padre Pro, St. Miguel Pro here. Lined up against the wall.
Right.
They shoot you. Viva Cristo Rey.
Yeah.
That I'm hoping that I could do, but all this, pulling things out of you and putting you in steam and just terrible things that some people do to martyrs. I don't know that I would persevere with that kind of a threat. So, and believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I tell you that I hope none of us have to endure that. Because not speaking for any of you, but certainly speaking for myself, I do not know that I would persevere, and I'd just as happily not be put to the test.
He had a follow-up question.
Yeah.
If a pope like St. Gregory was in there, would sedevacantists be happy with him?
Some of them might be. But some of them might not be. I mean, some would point out that he probably swore allegiance to the pope before him, who was not a rightful pope. Sedevacantists, again, vary as much as anybody else on any question.
Yeah.
You remember that for some sedevacantists, no one who has sworn allegiance to any pope since John the 23rd
Right.
could be a valid pope.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, there you go.
there you go. You'd have to ask every given sedevacantist himself what he thought.
Mm.
I mean, that's the problem with sedevacantism, in that it basically we're at an end.
Yeah.
Sedevacantism, in that sense, could have made sense so long as the last bishop consecrated by Pius XII was still alive. Interestingly, the last one of those was a communist, the Marxist Bishop of Juarez, Mexico. Yeah, it's kind of funny if you think about it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You know, I think a lot of people, you know, they, as this, it's kind of in this question where, you know, we want a pope, and we want all these crises, all these problems, you know, to be gone, and then a period of peace. Everyone goes to Latin Mass. But you know, one of the things I learned from reading your book, Vicars of Christ, The History of the Popes, is that really the history of the Church is nonstop crisis. It's going from one crisis to
one
another.
catastrophe to another.
It's like, oh, finally we're done with the early Christian persecutions, martyrdoms. Oh, well, here we go.
Here we go with something else.
Schism. Here we go with corruption between. I mean, the pornocracy.
Yeah.
And then, oh, we thought we're done with that. Oh, here comes the Reformation.
And
it doesn't end.
No, it doesn't, because it's the history of mankind.
Yeah.
And that, because of the fall, is always nasty. You know, if you look at the 18th century, the only pontificate that didn't really have any major problems was that of Benedict XIV.
Wow.
And he only lasted around 7 or 8 years. Benedict XIV was a great fellow. And the biggest thing he had to worry about was whether or not vampires exist.
Really? That
was a big question.
What happened?
They said they could. They might.
Wow.
Well, there was a whole rash.
What year was this?
This is the 1740s. There was a whole rash in Eastern Europe of vampire cases, which were generally dealt with by the Austrian government. And this led to the writing of a book there was a number of books, most famous Auguste Calmet's book on the question. The question is, can these things be real? And Benedict looked at the stone and said, yeah, I suppose they can be. Didn't say they were, said it was a possibility. But the thing was, we had all of these occurrences, and as we've said in previous episodes, the Austrian bureaucrats dealing with them wrote about them in this dull, bureaucratic German that was, I mean, the same tone that they'd order a bunch of pens in, you know. Obviously, they weren't impressed. You know, it was you or me. You know, oh my gosh, it's a vampire. This is vampire, huh? All right, take a squad of men out, look into it, report back. Don't disinter anything at night. Stake whatever you find that's affected. Rebury what isn't, and then come back and fill out these forms.
Wow.
You know, it's a very different time.
Yeah, very much so. I love our tangents tonight. We
really have gotten all over the place, but still, I have to admit the notion of a bored bureaucrat faced with a vampire.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you think you're going to impress me. This is a crucifix. Go away. I'll come for you in the morning. If you expect him to be excited, it's not going to be. They don't pay him enough to be excited. There is, ladies and gentlemen, a certain blessing in boredom. Now, the bored bureaucrat, well, there's something there. I don't know what.
Okay, well, that's it for this episode.
Yeah, hope you're happy, or at least bored like an Austrian bureaucrat faced with a vampire outbreak.
If you enjoyed watching the episode, click the subscribe button. If you'd like to send Charles a question, do so through the Tumblr House website. See you next time.
Again, we won't be able to get to them all, but those we do get to, we will mistreat wonderfully. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.